Hello everybody, welcome to TPT, which is Truth Proof Thursdays. So don't forget folks, we are now on a Thursday with Truth Proof. I'm Les from Digital Creations, and tonight we've got a great show for you. Now, I'd like anybody in the chat to just confirm that we do have audio running tonight, which seems to be an issue some weeks, so just give us a shout out if you can hear me okay. And hi Les, yeah, I'll just give a few name shout outs. Our moderator tonight is Deborah Singleton, so welcome, first time modding for us, Deborah, thank you very much. I'll give a few shout outs here. We've got Jane Bowery, Alison Buttle, welcome to the show, Lisa Odd, Teresa Walker, a lot of familiar names in here tonight. And I've got to welcome everybody who comes in regular and everybody around the world what comes in and views this show. Welcome. We've got Joey Hayes, we've got Stephen Giles, we have Neil Robinson and Rebecca King, Chris Mack. Okay, so as I say, thanks for everybody. We've had a short break from our live streams, as you know. We are back now. So without too much waffling from me, I will give you Paul and tonight's guest. Welcome guys.
Thank you very much, Les. Great intro, and it's good to be back. Hopefully we can get these Thursdays going. Welcome Andrew Collins, because what a fabulous researcher Andrew is. Somebody who goes the extra mile, I believe. I mean, I've met Andrew on several occasions up around East Yorkshire, and I can tell you he's pretty in-depth with the work that he does. And that's just a small part of what he does, because he's travelled the world extensively searching for all things strange, as well as writing and co-writing many books. And how do you fit it all in? Welcome, Andrew.
Hi Paul, hi Les, hi everybody out there. How do I fit it all in with difficulty, is the honest answer. I mean, I'm working on a book, a very special book at the moment on ancient Egypt, and you know, it is such a complex book that I've got to dedicate, you know, many hours every day to doing it. It's on a short deadline. It's got to be in with the publishers. They want to bring it out next year, so you just have to do it. And you know, eventually you do it. You do get a little bit of anxiety, but you get through it. So yeah, that's the answer.
How many books have you written in total, Andrew? And you might just have to come a bit closer to camera because I'm struggling to hear you, Andrew. Thank you.
Right, is that okay? Right, well, books-wise, it's probably about 50.
Wow.
You know, I mean, I'm pretty old, I'm afraid. I mean, the first book that I brought out was as far back as 1978, and you know, obviously the most recent one I co-wrote with my friend and colleague Greg Little, and that's called Innocent Origins. But I mean, across the whole span of my career, I've done books on UFOs, crop circles, ancient Egypt, the pyramids in particular. I did a book on Tutankhamun. I did books on Atlantis. You know, I mean, ancient technologies, etc., etc. And as you've said, you know, I do travel the world. I mean, I've been to virtually every continent, you know, investigating the mysteries of the past. And I started off as a humble UFO researcher in my home county of Essex, which is where I am, you know, even to this day. So, yeah, I mean, I've learned a few things as we've gone along, basically.
So, right then, so you started off in Essex. What particular incident or experience got you involved in this subject?
Well, I mean, I always had an interest in, yeah, anything paranormal, anything mysterious, anything to do with UFOs, and I started really investigating cases of UFOs in Essex, and after the first year or so, I thought, well, I've got so much material here, I should write them up, and it became a booklet, which is out there somewhere. I think it's called the Catalogue of UFOs in Essex for 1977 or something like that. I mean, you know, and it was my first attempt at writing something extensive. But then what happened is that the following year things started to get a little bit more in depth, because I started to realise that the whole idea that UFOs were purely nuts and bolts spacecraft.
Can I just stop you, Andrew?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to stop you in full flow, but I've got people here, and I know you're not going to shout, but they're saying, Andrew, please shout.
Right, okay. Well, the other thing I can do is bring this closer.
That's still okay.
Okay. Well, I basically realised that there was a connection between what we call UFOs and psychic phenomena. And what I mean by this is that there seems to be an interaction between us and the phenomena, some kind of connection. And I wrote about this. I did an article about it as far back as 1978. And, you know, it was something which takes it out of the realm of the idea that you're simply dealing with spacecraft with beings in them that come from another star system. And at first, I wasn't even sure what this meant. I mean, I thought that the people that were having these experiences were mental, to be honest. I just thought that, you know, this is impossible. But I realised that they were genuine. I started to try and get closer to the phenomena itself by working with psychics. You know, people that believed that they could interact with these, if you like, alien intelligences. And this also coincided with working on the first ever British UFO abduction involving a whole entire family who were going along a road and they saw a light. Then they entered into this strange green mist as the car headlights faded, you know, classic Close Encounters stuff. And they lost 3 hours of their life. I got the male of the family hypnotized with a professional hypnotist to try and recall what had happened to him. And that was very standard as far as, you know, the on-board experience was concerned. But there were a lot of questions over what really happened. And I began to realize that they hadn't been spending 3 hours away inside some spacecraft. I felt more that
I've got now then. I've got people saying sound has gone, Les, and you left your microphone on as well, Les. Joey Reed says AC is one wise unit.
Well, thank you.
But
do you want me to continue? Do you want me to try and continue?
But I just need to. I'll let me message the people in this chat, see whether we don't. I said, can you hear us? So. Not really, Tim Brennan says. Sound terrible, truth proof. Only heard one word from Andrew, but that was Essex.
Right. Okay. Well, look, I'm using a smartphone. It's now about 1 foot away from me, so it's about as good as you're going to get, I think.
How about, Andrew, if the guys can hear me, how about, and Les might disagree, remove the earphones, then we'll have the reverberation, but, and shall we try it, Les?
Hello.
How's that?
Let's see what we can do.
No sound at all. Unplug them.
Oh, I have. They're off completely.
Oh.
Right. Is that any better or not?
No better.
Okay.
Andrew needs turning. Well, guys, if you can hear it at least, then we're going to have to go with this. I apologise, and just tech issues. Yeah. Right, Andrew, carry on.
Right. Well, hopefully people can hear me. If you can't, then I personally apologise. But I mean, I'll try and keep it as basic as possible, and that's the fact that there was a relationship, not just between the human consciousness and the phenomena that was being seen by people, but also that close encounters, close interactions with this phenomena was allowing people to quite literally enter into an environment that was outside of normal space time. I mean, this is something that a number of people had speculated on. I mean, people like Jenny Randalls, started referring to this non-reality situation as the Oz factor, where strange things would occur when people had these close encounters that were just not normal. I mean, they would see strange things, they would hear strange things, that the whole environment would begin to, in many ways melt and change around them. And I think that what was going on is that they were entering into some kind of multi-dimensional environment. I mean, this is what I began to realize. And I wrote about this for the first time in a book called The Circle Makers, which was published in 1992. In the summer, obviously, as the title suggests, it had a strong connection with crop circles and that whole phenomenon. I mean, it was my introduction in a way to that topic. But I mean, it goes into great depth about how we could possibly be dealing not simply with extraterrestrials, but transdimensional intelligences that manifest through the phenomena that we actually see. And I don't just mean weird balls of light. I mean, I'm talking about structured craft that seem to appear out of these environments of light, which we call plasma or plasmoids, and that, we were dealing with some kind of interaction, more likely with parallel universes, parallel dimensions, and multi-dimensional environments, as opposed to the straightforward idea that we were just just connecting in some way with extraterrestrials coming here in physical spacecraft, and that those beings were flesh and blood. Now, I'm not saying that they don't exist at all, but what I am saying is that the method of their approach and their manifestation into our reality is something that involves multidimensional environments. I don't think they're coming straight from planet A to planet B, or star system A to star system B. It's much more complicated than that.
And do you obviously think that they've been here since millennia?
I think that they've been here since the beginning. I mean, in the new book, I'll take it back 400,000 years ago, and interactions between the native peoples of Israel and local sites that are well known for their mysterious lights today, and have been for thousands of years, because of different accounts that I've been able to find. And what I suggest is that this is not something that simply started when we started writing everything down, that this has been going on all the way since the beginning, since the Paleolithic age, and that our interactions with this phenomena is something that's probably molded human evolution and human civilization.
Andrew, do you think the lights play in all of this?
Well, I mean, it's multiple. I mean, firstly, they are indications that an area is particularly important. I think that our ancestors, particularly in Britain, let's say the Neolithic peoples that built the stone and earthen monuments, deliberately sought out sites around the country where mysterious lights and other strange phenomena were already taking place. And one of the main cultures involved in this process was the so-called Groovedware culture. That's one of the Neolithic cultures of Britain, who were essentially thriving around 3000 to 2500 BC. They came originally from the Orkney Islands and gradually spread
throughout mainland Britain and also into Ireland. And from what I can see, every single main location that they ended up creating settlements and ritual landscapes were associated in more modern times with UFOs and, you know, mysterious phenomena of different kinds.
But as we know, the same phenomena has been present throughout history, as you know, and these ancient peoples, that's why they, or do you feel that that's why they built their places of importance, earthworks, standing stones?
Well, I think that the reason why they built these monuments was to enhance their own connection through human consciousness with the environments around them. And that by using, let's say, you know, stone of a particular type that is known to affect human consciousness, let's say quartz-bearing rock, granites, you know, other particular minerals like tourmaline is a very, very important one, that these have the ability to not only affect human consciousness, but also to um, to have an interaction with the environment through the production of electricity. I mean, electricity is something that we normally associate with, you know, plugs in the house and, you know, making things like computers work. But the Earth itself produces electricity. Electricity is the flow of what we call electrons. And this is created through the stresses and strains that take place in the Earth, most obviously around what we call fault lines. And there's a huge relationship between fault lines and mysterious sites, stone and earthen monuments, and the appearance of mysterious light phenomena. I mean, it's there, for instance, at Bempton and the surrounding landscape. I mean, one of the biggest fault lines in Britain passes right the way through Bempton and is actually called the Bempton Fault. And I mean, I've had strange phenomena when I've been in your presence occur on electrical equipment exactly over that fault. And I didn't even realize that until afterwards. And what is going on, I think, is that the Earth itself is producing this electrical currents, electrical activity, which can not only affect, you know, human bodily systems, human consciousness, but also devices like smartphones, cameras, etc. But at the same time, it is allowing, it's helping the manifestation of strange phenomena, which seems to come out of electromagnetic fields that have become anomalous or changing, which somehow seem to produce almost doorways, if you like, or gateways, or portals, if there's a modern term, that allows this manifestation of phenomena to take place. Now, if this is difficult to imagine, think of a haunted house. A haunted house might be full of poltergeist phenomena, you know, visions of not visions, but visitations of ghosts and other strange things going on. And usually we would associate that with a single entity generally. If you can imagine taking that and placing it in the landscape and multiplying it by 100 times, that's what a UFO portal is. And once again, there is every indication that the phenomena seems to be controlled by an intelligence that is omnipotent, omnipresent, is aware that you are there, and will manifest when it wants to manifest. Now, we've talked about this, Paul, in the past. You've referred to this phenomena almost acting like a hive mind. And I believe that that is a very astute observation, that the phenomena, although it's individual in its own nature, in other words, one light is one light, one strange event is another, one being is another, one cryptid appearance is another, they're all interrelated. They are all part of a bigger consciousness that's present in that landscape. It's almost like the concept in ancient Greece of the so-called genius loci, the spirit of a place. But of course, that you mostly associate with an individual location, like the Oracle of Delphi or a Temple of Apollo or something like this. But I think that we're dealing with a genius loci on a much wider environmental level. It's something that we've come to refer to as an egregore. An egregore is essentially a presence that seems to be causing the manifestation of strange phenomena. It's been used within the paranormal before, particularly in connection with poltergeist houses. But if you can imagine that as this omnipotent force in a landscape, that's what I think is going on. I mean, it's something which I know that you, Paul, have sensed in connection with Bempton, and I've been to Skinwalker Ranch, and was privileged to spend a few days there, talking with all of the guys, particularly with Eric Bard, the main investigator at the site, in depth, massively in depth, for hours on end, about what they thought was taking place, on the ranch and in the valley as a whole. And they also believe exactly the same as you, Paul, that the phenomena is part of a single consciousness that exists and pervades that landscape, that can manifest in a in many different ways, and when it wants to. In other words, it's in control of what happens. If it wants to appear to you, it will. If it doesn't, nothing will ever happen.
Can I just come in here, guys?
Yes, yeah.
Can you just adjust your camera, please, Andrew? We're just missing the eyes.
Hold on. Okay, right. How's that? Well, okay. The sound may go down again, though.
Yeah.
So
I do apologise for the reverb, guys. I'd like to ask Andrew, do you think this, let's call it this Hive Intelligence, do you think it is actually producing the phenomena or allowing it to manifest and exhibit?
I think it's both. I think it both produces it and allows it to manifest. Now, I'm not saying that it's the sole intelligence involved, but it's the primary intelligence. And we don't know what it is. I mean, we can only but guess at this time. And we have a term that we use for these intelligence. We call them N beings, right? The N standing for number, as in N-dimensional beings. And because we don't know, we think that this is a dimensional thing, that we may be dealing with multiple, dimensions, but we don't know how many. So, when you don't know how many, you put the letter N, for N dimensions. And that, I think, is important. And if we are dealing with other dimensions, the problem is that we will never see this phenomena in its true state ever, because we are three-dimensional creatures. Yeah. We can only ever perceive our world in 3 dimensions, and of course, obviously, with a dimension of time to go with it. But as far as any more spatial or dimensions is concerned, we haven't got a chance of truly understanding. I mean, when we see a light in front of us, that could well simply be a 3-dimensional manifestation of a 4-dimensional or 5-dimensional creature or being that, unfortunately, we can't truly perceive for what it is. We can perhaps see things going on in our head, but physically through our eyes, we are going to have to fill in the gaps, I'm afraid. And I think that what goes on here is that we interact through the process of quantum entanglement with this phenomena. So what's quantum entanglement? Well, it's the idea that particles, when they're created, can split into two. I mean, we're talking about subatomic particles like photons, electrons, very, very small particles, and that they retain a connection with each other no matter how far apart they get. So that if you were to tweak one in a quantum experiment, the other would move in the equal and opposite direction at the same time. So this shows a transference not only of information but energy through a medium which we don't understand, one that's outside of normal space-time, one that's outside of the normal dimensions that we deal with. I mean, so in other words, it's not one-dimensional, it's not two-dimensional, it's not three-dimensional. It could even be 0 dimensions. And this was first realized by a quantum physicist by the name of David Bowen. I wrote about him in my book Light Quest, which came out in 2012, and I write about him extensively again in the new book that comes out.
I've still got them. I know it's difficult, Andrew, because you talk at a certain level like I do, but they're still telling me the sound is low. So if you could lift it a little bit, I'd appreciate it. Your voice.
All right, we will try. Okay, well, there was a quantum physicist by the name of David Bowen, and he realized that what we call plasma environments, exactly the same stuff that creates the lights that we see and experience out in the landscape, which is plasma, which is something known as a full state of matter, is that within this, it could animate, it could come alive. And what he began to realize is that coming in from a deeper level of existence was an intelligence or intelligences that could occupy that space whilst those plasma environments existed, and that these intelligences were coming from what he called the implicate order, which he felt was the order behind all of reality, something that was outside of three-dimensional space and one-dimensional time. And that this implicate order is now known as the pre-space. And this pre-space seems to be the medium through which energy and information can travel instantaneously. It has nothing to stop it communicating between one particle and its entangled neighbor. But the greater significance of this is that entanglement can also explain what we call telepathy or mind over matter, because if you think that what's going on in our heads, the neurons and all the rest of it are being, fired due to the presence of countless electrons, subatomic particles, then the counter particles of those could be in another person's head. In other words, the systems of particles in our head may have their counterpart, their twin, inside the heads of somebody else, causing a resonance, a entangled communication, which we would call telepathy or mind over matter. And this is something that only recently possibly has shown to be real, because scientists have now been able to do experiments where quantum entanglement is not just shown on a microcosmic level. In other words, subatomic particles that are outside of normal physics, if you like, but on a macrocosmic level. And what they've been able to do is to stimulate what they call a drum, which is about 1/5 the size of a needle head, a hair, human hair. I know it sounds small, but it is still macrocosmic in terms of the subatomic world, and to get it to resonate with a corresponding drum that's away from it in a manner which can only suggest entanglement. This is not a sound thing, like resonance, like with a tuning fork or something. This is the stimulation, the electrical stimulation of one of these drums affecting an identical drum that's away from the other one. So if you can imagine that drum inside, you know, my head and the other drum inside your head, that is allowing the transference of information and energy. And that could be an explanation of telepathy and mind over matter. So, I mean, you know, that explains what might be going on between two humans. But the phenomena itself is made of the same subatomic particles as what's going on in the inside of our heads and within our nervous systems, which is electrons, essentially. So, you know, they can communicate with each other through entanglement. And that allows our brains to connect with the phenomena instantaneously.
How do you think, Andrew, the phenomena views us, human beings? Meaning, not just where I research, but you can go to a place and it will present. And yet the researcher can spend months and months and nothing happens. You take a new person and it presents. So there's obviously some kind of stimulus there. But what do you think? I know it's not really important, I suppose. What do you think its role is with us? Are we actually of any significance?
Well, I mean, firstly, we have to consider that these intelligences, what we call the M beings, have been around since the beginning. I mean, 2 million years of human history. They've been there all the time. You know, in many ways, they are the true ancient aliens, in my opinion. So, you know, they have been nudging us in certain directions all the way along. But on a day-to-day basis, I think that they are not performing monkeys. You know, as you know only too well, you can go out onto the cliffs at Benton and, you know, nothing might happen for months. And as you quite rightly said, you can bring a new person along and suddenly the phenomena appears. Or you can be filming somebody and you turn the cameras off and suddenly it appears. It's almost like it's showing off. And I honestly believe that is a way of looking at it. It can show off. You know, it can basically say to you, look what I can do when I want to do it. And I know that comes across as suggesting that you're dealing with a very superior being. And I actually think that we have to start looking at it that way, because if we continue to look at the phenomena as simply the product of spacemen inside nuts and bolts vehicles, we're never going to get anywhere. Now,
totally agree.
You know, and now, as I said, I want to come back to that. I mean, I am not completely dissing the whole idea of flesh and blood aliens coming here. I mean, as early as 1964, Carl Sagan, you know, the well-known cosmologist, wrote a scientific paper where he concluded that it was inevitable that we've been visited many times by, you know, what we call extraterrestrials or aliens or whatever. So if somebody like Carl Sagan can argue this case, we should take it very seriously. But the bigger question is the impact of the physical flesh and blood aliens on, let's say, human civilization. I mean, you know, my colleagues of mine like Eric von Daniken obviously believe that was a big role. I see it as a lesser role. I think what is more likely is that it's affecting our brains, it's affecting our heads, human consciousness. That's the key to everything. I mean, I discovered only a couple of days ago that one of the pioneers of quantum physics, who was Max Planck, actually believed that human consciousness was the key to understanding reality. In other words, reality wouldn't exist without consciousness. And I mean, I didn't know that, but this is exactly what I concluded myself, and I actually put in the next book, that without consciousness, everything will fall apart, quite literally.
And we'll just sweepingly call it the phenomena. It must have a much higher level of consciousness, and it's actually reading our thoughts and predicting what we will do before we will actually do it. Do you think this is the reason, you know, we'll just broadly say, you know, they say as soon as I locked on with radar, it accelerated away. It knows everything we're going to do. It's almost like the Godhead.
Yes,
It's
yeah,
all
yeah. I mean,
encompassing.
yeah, I mean, obviously, if you evoke words like Godhead, it takes on a religious or mystical connotation, and I think that from our point of view, we need to avoid that. What we need to do is treat it on a one-to-one level and try to connect with it. You know, I mean, I think that something like sky watching is something that we should take a lot more seriously. I mean, yeah, it's great fun. I love it. I mean, it's one of my greatest pastimes. Um, but, you know, it has a greater purpose. And that greater purpose is to show it, you know, the phenomena, if you like, that, you know, we mean business. You know, we know it's there. We know it can interact with us, you know, and we are getting closer to finding ways of getting a two-way communication. And, you know, I think that the key is something that the ancients knew all along, and that's sound. And I don't just mean, you know, the use of vocal sound. I mean, very low frequency sound. I mean, as you know, Paul, from my visits to Benton, you know, we've recorded some absolutely bizarre
Yeah.
sounds that were inaudible at the time, that came out on recording equipment that seemed to be intelligent in nature. And I think it's almost giving us a clue. It's almost pointing us in the right direction, that that sound on a very low frequency level, anything down from about 50 hertz down to the so-called infrasound range, which is between 20 and 1 hertz, is key to not just attracting the attention of the phenomena, but also putting us in a state of mind where it becomes easier to communicate with it. I say this because infrasound has, for at least 20, 30 years, been proposed as the solution to ghostly phenomena, paranormal phenomena, and people feeling as if they're entering into otherworldly states. In fact, you know, skeptical paranormal researchers will say it is the answer. But I think that what they're doing is throwing the baby out with the bathwater here, because there are many sites, particularly megalithic sites, that seem to be specific to generate very low frequency sound, including infrasound. And I'm sure the reason for this was A, to allow us to enter altered states of consciousness, but secondly, to attract the phenomena, not just because the phenomena might hear what's going on. I don't think it's that. I think that for the most part, it's human consciousness reaching out and saying, hey, we're here, we're doing the right thing. Are you going to respond to us? But the other important thing is that there's a big relationship between sound, electricity, through the generation of minerals in the earth. When you generate electricity in the earth, a process that's generally referred to as piezoelectricity, it also creates sound. Sound can be used to generate piezoelectricity. So in other words, if you introduce into an environment that's already, you know, can be triggered into producing, you know, electrical phenomena, piezoelectricity, then low frequency sound could be carried through the earth, possibly for miles, kilometers, and can trigger the manifestation of electrons that will then come together to create light phenomena. And this is something which I've written about for articles in, for instance, Ancient Origins, to show that places like Stonehenge and Durrington Walls, very close by, almost certainly their primary function was as sonic temples. And that was to not only put people into altered states of consciousness, but also to attract the lights and the phenomena they knew to be present in that landscape.
Andrew, what? And I do apologise for this echo, guys. What do you think's happening when people experience what I call the lower silence, when they're immersed into this? We're people in the cryptid field, in the UFO field. Suddenly everything went silent. Suddenly everything went prickly. The skin on my stood up, the hairs on my arms.
Yeah.
What's
Well, I mean,
happening?
firstly, you know, I think there's two things going on here. One, it's an electromagnetic effect of the environment beginning to change. You know, the static electricity and the flowing electricity is beginning to change, and that's obviously what you're beginning to feel on your skin. But clearly, that's beginning to affect the human brain, and you know the way that it's seeing what's going on. But also, I think that what's happening is that it's beginning to create an environment which is going to be multidimensional in nature. And because as soon as you have plasma manifestation going on, you are entering into a multidimensional environment. Now, in the new book, I will be citing scientific evidence from various different sources that are suggesting that plasma is multidimensional in its nature, in its state. So, in other words, the plasma itself, once it starts manifesting, is quite literally creating a portal that's allowing not just our own connection to a multi-dimensional state, but it could equally be connected, you know, like a black hole and a white hole with somewhere else, you know, maybe a parallel dimension, maybe a parallel universe, maybe the past, maybe the future, we don't know. And that this could allow something like a cryptid or a being to walk from one through to the other.
Yeah.
Now, how this might occur is, we don't know. I mean, and it would be foolish to try and create any physics for it at this time. But the basic mechanics behind it have scientific validation right now.
Yeah. I glanced into the chat earlier and I saw Johnny Summer said, when you were talking about sound, the fear frequency. And that's all he said. So I don't know whether that resonates with
That's
you.
correct. That's absolutely correct, because what infrasound does is that it can create a sense of entering an otherworldly environment, but it will also, or can also, cause what we know as paranoia and fear. You know, I mean, this is an established scientific fact. So, you know, that is part of it. And I think that the ancients would have feared this phenomena. I mean, you know, I mean, going back to Bempton, for instance, you've got this 2.5 mile long trench, which you know only too well, which is Dane's Dyke. I mean, it literally severs the area of Flamborough Head from the mainland.
Yeah.
And it's about 100 feet deep, it's about 100 feet across, and it was man-made. It was created by human beings. I mean, and why the hell would you create this? Well, firstly, there's good evidence to suggest that it dates to the Neolithic period, whereas archaeologists will tell you it's much later, possibly Bronze Age or even Iron Age. But secondly, the archaeologists say, well, it was defensive. You know, it was because there were probably settlements in the area of Flamborough Head and, you know, on the edges of Benton, and it protected those people against invasions from the mainland, you know, from the inland. That's complete crap, because
Agreed.
there were no Neolithic and early Bronze Age settlements in the area of Flamborough and Bempton. All of them were outside of it, around Bridlington, around the monolith, was it the Rudstone monolith, or and slightly to the south. They were all outside of Danes Dyke, and all the indications are, again, I do mention this in the book, is that the Neolithic people were aware of the strange phenomena, what we call the Bempton phenomena today, and were trying to contain it within a triangular area of land, almost to keep it in, so that their interactions with it were kept to a controlled level. Now, we know obviously today, many things, UFOs, cryptids, all the rest of it, occur outside of Danes Dyke, but we don't know how the Neolithic people may have seen things. Maybe they only saw things specifically related to that triangle of land, and that they felt that by creating this, they could contain it within this triangular area. And it's so weird, of course, that in occult, tradition, that if you want to contain some kind of supernatural being, you create a triangle to do so. You draw a triangle and you evoke that particular being, a demon or spirit, into that triangle. And I think my personal feeling is that there's a connection there with the creation, the construction of Danes Dyke.
Just while we're on with the triangle, what and the occult, what do you think the connection is then to the triangle-shaped UFOs, pyramid-shaped UFOs, or are they man-made in your opinion?
Well, I mean, as far as the actual shapes of the objects, I think that for the most part, they are putting on a show for us. In other words, if we expect triangular craft to appear, or pyramid-shaped craft, or tetrahedrons or whatever, that's exactly what we will see. Now, I'm not saying that therefore none of these are, not their natural forms, but I think that the human consciousness interaction often defines what we see. If we think we're going to see flying saucers, we're going to see a circle of light spinning around a top or something like that, because that's what we expect to see. So the phenomena is putting on a show. But I mean, that's not to say that there isn't any structured craft, because as you know too well, at Bempton, there are several very good cases of structured craft being seen in the Bempton area. And I can't deny that. And I would never want to deny that. And as a parallel, if we go to Norway, for instance, and Hessdalen, which is where we know that mysterious lights have been seen since the early 1980s, and almost certainly historically as well, is that you don't just see mysterious lights there. Structured craft has been seen on many occasions, certainly several occasions, and these have been seen by local people, not just UFO spotters coming into the area trying to see something, but by local people that live in the area of Hessdalen. So, the connection between the lights, the plasmas, the plasmoids is one of the terms that's used, and structured craft is a real thing. They go hand to hand with each other. And of course, this is the same at somewhere like Skinwalker Ranch. I mean, when I was there, I spoke to various individuals who didn't live there, who were there working, who had seen mysterious lights during the day, whilst they were actually working there over a period of a couple of months. They recounted them to me. I mean, they weren't believers. They were just working there. But we also know that structured craft and other weird, seemingly three-dimensional, vehicles and beings have been seen at Skinwalker Ranch on a number of occasions. And this is something that I think goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years. I mean, you in your own books have talked about the fact that very close to Bempton is Star Car, which is the most famous and well-known ritual ceremonial centre of the Mesolithic age in Britain. It dates to 11,000 years old. It is the same age as Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey. Unfortunately, you can't see much of it today, but I think we can assume that it would have involved a settlement with earthen constructions, shamanistic areas for rituals, and we know that the people were wearing, headdresses of red deer antlers and scalps, which suggests that they looked very much like the shamans of Siberia. Yeah, pictures of those. But in addition to this, there have been wolf skulls found at the site, which also suggests that they were involved in wolf shamanism. And I think it is absolutely no coincidence that not just at Bempton and the area around Danes Dyke, but in the area of Star Car and on the very road on which you access Star Car, there have been sightings of these canine-headed anthropomorphs, bipeds, which in archaeology are referred to as lycons. Lycon from the same word as lycanthropy, which means, wolf-like, figure. And that these have been seen in the modern day. Now, it cannot be any coincidence that wolf shamanism was taking place at Star Car in Mesolithic times, and today we are getting the appearances of wolf-headed or canine-headed bipeds, human individuals. I think it's a resonance of something that was going on, an entangled resonance through human consciousness interaction that continues to take place. And as I said, you yourself almost suggested the same in one of the Truth Proof books.
Yeah.
And I've quoted you in the book
Well,
relating to this.
you.
I think it was a very, very astute observation.
You make some brilliant points there, Andrew. And last week, I spoke to a professor who's actually in the chat. I'm not going to expose his name. He might even tell us. And he was saying much the same as you. And I don't want to quote him, but the feeling I got was that a suggestion that the shamanistic people of Star Car and the transformation, if this works, if we're to go with that notion, is still acting out from those early times into the present.
It's definitely, that's exactly what's happening. I mean, obviously it's not 100% the same, because obviously you've got 11,000 years of human consciousness interaction with that landscape that's going to mold and manipulate the way that things appear to us and where they appear. But I mean, I think that's the answer, but I can back that up by telling you that the same thing is happening at Skinwalker Ranch. You have these canine-headed bipeds, appearing there, and they, of course, are interpreted to get my English right, are interpreted as skinwalkers. So what are skinwalkers? Skinwalkers is merely the term that's used for a Navajo shaman that has transformed into a supernatural shape, most obviously a wolf, because the same name for Navajo wolf is the same word as Navajo witch, and they're called witches. I mean, they're not witches with pointed hats and broomsticks. No. These are shamans. This was the term that seemed to be associated with the Navajo shamans was a witch. And so, in other words, this was going on in the past. And why was it going on? And the fact is that in the 19th century, in particular, there were two main tribes in the area of Skinwalker Ranch that were greatly rival each other. I mean, in fact, they had battles. And this was the Ute, spelled UTE, and the Navajo. They hated each other and still do to this day. And they both are in the area of Skinwalker Ranch. The Ute took over the land of the Navajo, which was kept originally as sacred land, no man's land, where nobody was supposed to go into unless you were to do your rituals. This is the area of the Utah Basin, which Skinwalker Ranch is located. And so once the Utes had done this, they started to see in this area these supernatural forms, like essentially supernatural wolves, and presumably also these wolf-headed bipeds, which they took to be the Navajo witches in their Skinwalker form. And I think that that's exactly what they are, and that's exactly what continues to go on, not simply through the activity of the Navajo and obviously the Ute. I mean, they're both doing, what we would call, black magic to this day. Right, you're all going swirly.
Yeah, you just stopped, but I could still hear you.
All right, okay. Right,
I've gone swirly loads of times, don't worry.
Okay, and that what's this magic is still going on today. They're still practicing what we might call black magic to this day. There's evidence of it, coming up all of the time. There's still this rivalry between the two particular tribes, and I think that the key words here is human consciousness interaction.
That's what I was getting at. So just like I know you and your good friend Richard, and hi Richard if you're listening, really like your meditation. These Navajo is a form of meditation and get it into the frequency to tap into this otherworldly way of being, and it's a similar thing that's happening, or the same thing.
Well, look, the key here is human consciousness interaction, but also the fact of entanglement, the entanglement between our minds, everybody's minds, with the environment, with the the electricity, the earth, the minerals, the crystals, if you like, which is one of the things I think that allows this information to be held in the places that it is across such long periods of time. But on top of that is that entanglement occurs outside of normal space-time. It is not bound to the here and now. In other words, when a particle, twin particles are connected, one can go into the past and one can go into the future. There is nothing to stop that. And again, there have been scientific experiments to try and show this is the case, and that the communication between those particles can continue. So, in other words, this also becomes an explanation for everything from precognition to premonitions. The idea that we can connect with our future selves to pick up information about what is to come. Maybe a danger in front of us. If we're on the road, or if you were in the past, in a jungle or something, and you were about to be attacked by a lion, you could send back that information, maybe just 5 minutes into the past, to say, take a different route. There's something bad going to occur if you continue along this particular pathway. Do you see what I mean?
Do you think, Andrew, that happens? And do you think it's a form of it when Andrew Collins thinks, well, I haven't seen David for ages, for probably 2 years, and you walk around the corner and he's there?
Yeah. Oh, it's unquestionably it. I mean, certain New Age writers have cottoned onto this. I think it's only a matter of time before science writers essentially come up with the same conclusion, particularly now that we know that quantum entanglement works on a macrocosmic level. In other words, the real world around us, it's there, it's real, so there's no way that it cannot be affected with human consciousness. No way at all.
No. And I want to jump back to chat for a moment. Someone in the chat said, why do you think that the spheres of light are primarily orange? You might not have any views on that, but
well, I think a lot of that has to do with the frequencies that they are created and the environment in which they are found. Color is something that's based on frequency, just like looking at the rainbow or whatever. So that's the actual color for the most part is irrelevant. But on the other hand, I would say that the phenomena can deliberately take on certain colors if it so wished. I mean, going back to Skinwalker Ranch, for instance, we know that the certain colours, I think it was, is it the blue ones, that were considered to be, you know, like literally evil, and would, you know, do bad things. They were the ones that were present when, you know, some of the dogs went missing, and they found that, you know, just their carcasses and bits of them the next day. I think they called them the Blue Meanies. Is that right? If I remember rightly, you know,
I don't
obviously
know.
after the you know, the Beatles thing, was the Blue Meanies were in, was it Yellow Submarine, I believe, was it? So, you know, why is it that a certain coloured type of light can be associated with malice, whereas others can be seen as benevolent? I mean, I think that the phenomenon's deliberately doing it. It's deliberately choosing a colour with its attitude and its approach to us humans and what it wants to do.
And do you think, because some people feel elation when they're looking at these things, some people feel extreme fear, we know that it's the phenomena that's impressing that upon us, but how are they doing it? Are they triggering chemicals in our body?
Well, I mean, I think you've got to remember that this entanglement is going on all the time. And if we're only just beginning to understand its existence, quite clearly the phenomena, if it is an intelligence, which we believe it is, it will have had, it would have been aware of this thousands, if not hundreds or millions of even years ago. In other words, it's been using it all along. It's been aware of entanglement. And so for that reason alone, it has an advantage over us. But if we also see it as far more potent, far more powerful, it can control what we do, where we stand, where we go, what we see, what nights we go out, which nights we stay in, what nights, you know, you, for instance, feel something's going to happen and something does happen, you know. And we also have to remember that because entanglement is outside of normal space time, then the light that you see on a particular night, its connection with you, or the connection of the intelligence, has been with you not just, you know, a few weeks or something, but your entire life, you know, in other words, and will be until the moment you die. It has that connection. The connection is not a single isolated incident. It has the ability, the power to connect with you throughout your entire life. In other words, it can change and manipulate what you do, possibly even the career that you take, you know, through interacting with human consciousness. You know, you can't see these things as individual instances. They are, you know, a huge picture that doesn't really start or finish. It's always there.
Right. So I think that your views on what you're researching have probably changed since you're in its early beginnings. Yeah, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if yes, what were the turning points, or was it just a drip?
Well, I mean, I started off being a very firm believer in nuts and bolts aliens, nuts and bolts space, sorry, flesh and blood aliens and nuts and bolts spacecraft. And even once I'd realized that there was a psychic connection, I still thought that it was simply their superior way of communicating with it. I didn't see it beyond that. But the information that was being given to, let's say, you know, contacts, psychics, or whatever, often didn't really pan out. Why didn't it pan out? Because of human failures. You know, I mean, because we're trying to interpret pure information received into the brain, into our, you know, our consciousness, and trying to relay that to the real world. And we get it wrong. I mean, you know, I've worked with what I consider to be some of the top psychics in the world, and the best of them are only 90% accurate. Most of them are no more than 50% accurate at any one time. So we get things wrong. But the trouble is that if we see these, you know, extraterrestrial intelligences as all powerful, we assume that they can communicate with us perfectly. But that's not the case. They still have to work through from our subconscious mind, which is picking up this information from somewhere outside, you know, what I call the mind of God, or the entanglement of all, through our subconscious mind, through into our conscious mind, and then it has to be related to the people around us. Like, I see this or I see that, and we get it wrong. We cock it up, to be honest. And once that happens, we can think, oh my God, you know, these intelligences are not all powerful, because they messed it up. They told us that we would, if we went out tomorrow and looked, you know, for UFOs, we'd see one, and nothing happened. So what's going on? You know, we blame them.
But it's
Where
us getting it wrong.
It's us that are messing things up.
Hmm.
So we have to take that into consideration, that even though these things are very powerful and can manipulate us when they wish, for the most part, we're left to our own devices. And sometimes I think that we just simply get it wrong.
So, through your meditation, well, let's say with Richard, have you had some very good results? And if so, give us some examples, or an example.
Well, I mean, you know, the example which I think you probably know I'm going to go with, related to the Bempton phenomena, really began when Richard and I first turned our attentions to Bempton. What year would that have been? I think it was probably early 2019. It might have been 2018. I can't remember now. And, you know, I mean, I've listened to a couple of your interviews, read just a little bit about it. And what we generally do is that if there's a particular subject that we're interested in, we'll dedicate a Saturday night over to focusing on that particular location or subject, and just see what comes into our heads. You know, on that night, on a Saturday night, it was in March, we just visualized ourselves going to Bempton and just see what happened, see where we were drawn to. I mean, I knew, for instance, that the Rudstone was close by, so, you know, let's try and maybe target that and see what happens. And what Richard saw instantly, and he said it was just so powerful, it just came into his head without even trying, was a car vehicle, blue, particular brand, in a car park at Bempton in the cliffs, a gentleman getting out, going across to the RAF station, going down below into the what do you call it, the underground,
The bunker, yeah.
bunker, and some light appearing and then disappearing, vanishing, and that then he got further information suggesting that this person had been obsessed with the RAF station and had pictures on a computer or on or he certainly saw them, I can't remember exactly what words he used, of these erotic images that were very strange down there. And that he went down there to investigate, and something happened to him. And the strange thing is that the voice in his head was saying, 9 years, you know, you will see 9 years, and, you know, anniversary, and, you know, a few other things I won't even go into to do with this.
Yeah.
And we came out of the meditation, and he relayed this to me, and we checked it out, and we found that a person had vanished at Bempton in exactly the same way as what he'd seen 9 years to the day of when we were doing that meditation, probably almost within, I won't say within the hour, but certainly in a similar time of day.
Okay.
And it was like something coming through to him saying, look what I can do if I want. And, again, this is a way of showing off.
This is
now, as far as the actual disappearance is concerned, I don't think we need to go into that. But you know the case, and obviously I do as well. It's still ongoing, so we can't really even talk about it.
Totally agree.
It was something that phenomena we connected with for the first time basically said to us, look what I can do if I want. And that's scary. Because I mean that doesn't normally happen. I mean Richard and I have attuned to Bempton on various occasions since that time, and yeah, we got some interesting bits and pieces, but nothing like this ever from that point onwards. It was the fact of the 9 years to the day, and the 9 years is significant because, as you know, there's a location at Bempton where if you go around it 9 times, the devil is supposed to appear. It's a pit, isn't it? I mean, this was in folklore. And 9 is a number that's connected with the god Odin. There seems to be a connection with the Norse tradition in that area. Previously, Richard and I had been working on something to do with Rendlesham Forest to do with the number 9 and its significance. So the fact that it said 9 years was also something personal to us. But then you have to say to yourself, well, what the hell was going on here? I mean, was it simply a coincidence that you were tuned exactly 9 years to the day later after that incident? And unfortunately, there is no answers in terms
prior
of
knowledge.
Normal space-time. There isn't.
And Richard had no prior knowledge of any of this.
No, not a thing. Well, I mean, I didn't even know about the case either.
Okay. So jumping from that then, what do you think the military know? Let's just jump in a different direction about the UFO phenomena, the full spectrum.
Okay, well, look, very soon the Pentagon has to release a report on everything they know about UFOs, particularly these videos that the Tic Tac, is it TikTok? Tic Tac, yes, video, and the other similar ones that have been released into the public domain. It's going to be presented to the Senate by something like June the 27th or something like this. What's this going to tell us? Is this going to be the big disclosure that everybody expects? The answer is, of course, it's not. What they're going to do is essentially to admit, look, yeah, you know, that there is something out there. These videos are real. They'll probably give us other examples as well. They will say that we don't know what this is. It could be alien. It could be some natural phenomena. It could be some foreign power. That's going to be essentially it, because that's all that their brief needs to say. You know, they're not going to really go much beyond that. In other words, they're going to deliver what they're told to deliver and no more. So it's not going to help the general public to better understand the UFOs. But I think that from what I've said, you know, in this interview, is that we're getting to a stage now where we know that we're not just simply dealing with nuts and bolts spacecraft coming here. We're talking about the manifestation of objects that are quite literally appearing through portals, probably many of them plasma light-based portals, and that they are present in our environment for a short period of time before vanishing back from whence they come. I mean, what's the connection with cryptids, for instance, which are also seen at these same portal locations? Well, they're obviously coming from somewhere else. They're you know, they are a product of human conscious interaction, but that's not to say they don't have their own existence, at least temporarily. So they could be coming from some, you know, parallel place. Let's you know, that they are quite literally, you know, reality hoppers or reality jumpers, but they can only exist for a very short period of time before they have to disappear away. So I think that people have to accept that we're dealing not just with, you know, nuts and bolts spacecraft, but multi-dimensional intelligences and objects that are associated with those intelligences, and that the overall intelligence is far cleverer than us. It's not just individual pilots in a spacecraft. It's far more complicated than that.
You talked about our consciousness. So jump back to the shamanistic element. Do you think that thought forms could be producing the extension of the person becoming the wolf, becoming the jaguar, and
Yeah, I mean, the thought forms in many ways is the energy, if you like, that allows that manifestation to take place. Once again, think in terms of a poltergeist-ridden house, a haunted house. I mean, quite clearly, you get thought forms in a haunted house, but you also get poltergeist phenomena. You also get apports, objects appearing. Apports,
yeah, I said apples. Sorry.
Apples. No, not apples. No. That is often confused, but it's not the same thing. You get apports appearing in houses. I mean, I've literally seen apports appear out of thin air. Now, if you can think that an apple is maybe a tiny little thing like a crystal or an object or something, but if you can multiply that and put it out into the landscape, in many ways, that could be like your cryptid or your craft coming into manifestation. But what's so interesting about apports is that very often they are only temporarily present. They will disappear as quickly as they appear. In other words, they're only temporary. In other words, they're unstable in a three-dimensional reality, and eventually they break up and go back into an energy form, a thought form once more.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying that they don't have some physical point of origin, because presumably if something, a crystal appears, it must come from somewhere, but it's certainly appearing to us out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine, let's say, a physical craft being like a very, very big apport with an intelligence associated with it, that's not a bad way of looking at it, really.
Right, thank you. Jump in again. What are your views on what's happening with the animal mutilation?
Well, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, firstly, we have to look at mundane explanations, and I don't even want to go into what they might be. Various authors have done so, but I strongly believe that there is a relationship between portal locations like Bempton and Skinwalker Ranch, the San Luis Valley in Colorado, for instance, and similar, portal areas, that there's a relationship between those portals and these mutilations of different types of animals. What creates them, I don't know. I mean, there is always the possibility that these cryptids are responsible. They come in, they attack an animal, and then they vanish themselves, just leaving behind the carcass. But it seems to be more than that, because the incisions that are made in these animals look like laser burns. And laser burns is something that you would associate with plasma. And plasma is the stuff of the lights or, objects of light that you see. So it is possible that these burns are being created deliberately by these plasma environments that are taking form, taking shape to actually create those incisions. Why exactly is not only difficult to understand, but in some ways, I think that if we try to understand it, it's going to almost take us down the wrong avenue right from the word go. We just don't understand these intelligences and their motives.
Do you think other researchers and other important sites around the world, and you touched on Skinwalker quite extensively, do you think that they should now be reaching out, and I will say the area I'm looking into and other areas, and correlating information?
Well, absolutely, definitely. And I mean, it was only, for instance, by talking to you and also talking to Eric Bard at Skinwalker Ranch that I started to realize that what you thought about the phenomena was identical to what they think about the phenomena, that it is a part of some kind of, collective that, that is all seeing, all knowing, that is presence, like this egregore, as we call it now, which is like a very big form of what the ancients used to refer to as a genius loci, the spirit of a place. So I mean, absolutely. I mean, there are so many different types of these locations around the world, not types, but variations of these. That all the investigators, the lead investigators, should be in touch. And I mean, if you ever have the opportunity to do that, I mean, I would
Well,
encourage it and support it.
I've been sending George Knapp bits of information that he's been interested in, but I don't think he was involved with Skinwalker now, is he?
Um, I presume so. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously he wrote the book, Hunt for the Skinwalker. I mean, it's like any book you do, you never leave it behind.
No.
You always have to keep coming back to it. You have to keep supporting it. You have to keep promoting it if new discoveries are made. So I'm sure he's still connected with it. I mean, at the moment, from what I understand, he's heavily involved with this Pentagon release of information for the Senate and these videos that have been released by the or into the public domain that were taken by US Navy pilots.
Well, two more things. I want to ask Les if he's got any questions, and then I just want to ask you about your books. And
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
so, Les,
Yeah, thanks for that, guys. It's very fascinating tonight. It's a great show, by the way, and we've got lots of people in the chat, and we're getting some great questions through. One of the questions comes from Warren Hardcastle, and Warren is asking, does Andrew feel that we have been developed to only see in 3 dimensions for control purposes?
Actually, that's a very, very interesting question. And the answer may be, the answer is yes. I mean, certainly as far as us is concerned, and us over the past few thousand years. But I also strongly believe that some of our most distant ancestors, during the Paleolithic age, like the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and going back as far as Homo erectus, had a much wider scope of interacting with this phenomena, and that they may well have been able to see 4-dimensional, sort of multi-dimensional environments in a way which we just can't today, probably due to their innocence and and not putting too much fixed preconceived ideas on the world around them. So I get the feeling that their interaction with this phenomena was far more total than ours will ever be. And I mean, this is an important takeaway which the viewers here need to get on board with, and that's the fact that the UFO phenomena has been with us all the way along. This is not something that started 70 odd years ago. It's been there all along. Portal locations like Skinwalker Ranch or Bempton have been producing this phenomena all the way along. And people like the Neolithic, culture, like, were aware of this and deliberately built their monuments close to, not on, that's the other important thing. Very often the settlements, the Neolithic settlements, don't seem to be where the phenomena takes place. It's a spot that seems to be safe, a little way away, that they can look towards where the phenomena is, because they're not stupid. They know that if you can't build your settlements over the bee's nest, if you like. I mean, you'll get stung. You've got to be a little bit a way away from it and observe. But having said that, there's no question that the stone and earthen monuments enhance the phenomena. I mean, we've talked about Danes Dyke in the area of Bempton. Of course, the other one is Willie Howe, which is an extraordinary earthen structure not far from Bempton. And as you yourself, told me and took me to the site, is that there was a pilot flying over there in a light aircraft, and he encountered, light phenomena, and lost time and almost lost control of the aircraft, And the next thing he knows, it's dark, and he's attempting to land his aircraft in a nearby airfield in the dark because he hadn't expected to be out that night.
Exactly.
He lost time. I mean, that's an incredible thing. And he states, as you've made clear, that he was directly over Willie Howe when this happened. So here you have a perfect example of the relationship between these prehistoric sacred sites and the phenomena at hand. And obviously the Rudstone is the tallest standing stone in Britain. This is just on the edge of Bempton. I mean, in size, at the moment it's something like about 28 feet in height, I believe.
That's correct.
And it's lost some of its height. And it could be as much as 50 to 60 feet in length. And the particular type of stone wasn't even local. It came from the area, the moorland just to the west of Whitby, which I don't know how far away it is from there, but it's, what is it, 20 miles, something like that?
It's more, Andrew. You'd be looking at about 39, 40 miles.
Right. Well, and so why do that? Why bring that monument, that monolith, which is 50 to 60 feet in length, and erect it at a location, and where not only did they build a Neolithic settlement around it, but also, as you've told me, big cat sightings are reported.
Lots of big cat sightings,
yeah. In the vicinity, probably within sight.
And the light phenomena.
Was that?
And the light form phenomena.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Oh, gosh, yeah. And I'm trying my hardest not to talk because I realise, people, it's reverberating. Not far from the Ludstone monolith, at a place called Springdale Farm, I was taken to a crop circle there that nobody got to see. Now, I'm not saying all crop circles are genuine, but I've no reason to believe that this one was anything but the real deal. I was just taken to this crop circle. I couldn't tell anybody about it because they didn't want their land to become a thoroughfare. And appeared overnight. But just a side note, but that's close to the monolith.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Neolithic people were aware of all this, but I'm sure the Paleolithic people were too. And the book that I've written, I've worked with my friend and colleague Greg Little on this book. Is going to be called Origins of the Gods. I know it's a generic title, I know, but the publishers like this type of title. And my part starts 400,000 years ago in what is today Israel, with this place called the Kezem Cave. The word Kezem means magic, basically, or divination. And I bring it forward, right the way through to Skinwalker Ranch, to Bempton, to show that human consciousness interaction is something that is integral to the manifestation of this phenomenon and our interaction with it, and that it has helped forge human evolution, let's get it right, all the way along. Now Greg's half, because Greg is an expert in Native American traditions and Native American mound building cultures, what he's done, he's looked at the Native American beliefs to do with mysterious lights, small beings, what you call greys today or whatever, and tried to discover the ultimate philosophy behind what they thought of all of this and its origins and all the rest of it. And it's remarkable stuff. I mean, so he's concentrated on the American side of it. Some UFO stuff in there, John Keel stuff to do with ancient aliens and whatever. But, he concentrated more on the Native Americans. And the reason for this is because as a living tradition, of course, they can provide much better historical information relating to what their elders believed. I mean, in most other parts of the world, this has been lost or is very difficult to achieve. But there were a number of folklorists and ethnographers, as they were called, who spent a lot of time with these tribes in the 18th and 19th century, just listening to their beliefs and their understanding about the supernatural world and the natural world around them. And up until recently, these type of stories have been ignored by, scientists, by anthropologists and things like that. But they're now coming back in vogue, and it's realized that they contain kernels of information which have been lost even within the last 100 years by many of these Native American tribes. So, it's very, very important to grasp what these indigenous peoples believed about what we would call UFOs and aliens today, and why they did rituals, why they did shamanism, why they did rituals, how all these things were related together.
Wasn't it fascinating the world over? The same type of carvings are depicted, the same type of rock paintings are depicted in an age when we didn't have this global travel, long before we all interacted with each other. Yet the phenomena was interacting with different civilizations in a similar way, and we're seeing it today. I mean, which you'll have seen on your travels.
Well, absolutely, but I mean, the foreword to the book is written by Eric von Daniken, which is a nice continuity, because obviously his bestseller from 1969, I believe, was, of course, Chariots of the Gods. And this was one of the books that I read when I was a kid, and it seriously influenced me. I mean, not only that book, but certainly that was one of the books, because it introduced me to things like the Great Pyramid, the Moai statues of Easter Island, the Nazca lines, the Sumerian culture, even Stonehenge to a degree, with the questions of, is it possible that the creation of these monuments had something to do with the interaction between us and extraterrestrials, or ancient aliens, or ancient astronauts, as they were known back then. And although, and what he stresses, I mean, he stresses this again and again. He said, look, I didn't say to people the aliens built these things. He said, I didn't say that. All I've done is poised questions for people to think. Yeah. And it certainly made me think. And, I began investigating the stone and earthen monuments of Britain, like Stonehenge and Avebury. And of course, that field widened to investigating the Great Pyramid. And I've been around the world looking at these monuments, and trying to understand. I'm not that bothered about how they were made. That doesn't interest me. I'm interested in the motivations behind their construction and what the people actually believed who constructed them. How did they interact? How did they relate to these supernatural forces and these intelligences that we now know exist and that have been with us all the way along? And that these are the questions that I raise and try to answer in this new book. And what Eric von Daniken has realized is that this is the next part of the puzzle.
And that is quite thought-provoking, to be honest, Andrew, and a book I'm definitely going to read. And
well, I'll certainly bring a copy up when I come to it.
Les, have we any more questions before we...
Yeah.
You okay for time, Andrew?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, some great answers there from Andrew and Paul. Looking through my questions, we have from Valerie. Welcome to the show, Valerie. Question to either of you: why do you think the amorphous lights are mainly orange? I think we've already touched on this.
Yeah, we covered that, Les. But
well, look, as I said, it's mostly to do with frequencies. It's to do with frequencies of light, essentially.
Okay. Yep. I'll move on from that then. Michael Park, welcome to the show, Mike.
Hi, Mick.
Evening, guys. Do you think these balls of light are some kind of scouting craft? I think you've been through that one as well, Andrew, haven't you?
No, I don't think we covered it.
I mean, the trouble is that I used to think that back in the late 70s. I actually believed that myself. but no, I don't think so at all. Once again, you're looking at it too mechanistic. Please stop looking at all of this from a mechanistic point of view, because we can only do that with the technology that we've either got or envisaged for the future. So please don't do that. I mean, when you see a ball of light, it is a ball of light, but it's not just an object. It has sentience, it can have intelligences, it can have intelligence, but it can also act as, quite literally, a vehicle or portal to allow something else to manifest into our 3D reality.
Okay.
Brilliant. I'll move on to another question from Steve Wills. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Nice, Steve.
Yeah, he's saying, great show, guys. What are Andy's thoughts on the Averley UFO encounter, which he was the principal investigated many years on?
Well, I mean, again, we talked about this. I didn't do it by name, but the family was the Day family. The male was John Day. There were three children in the vehicle, and what I realised is that when they entered into this luminous green mist, which is very similar to what you, Paul, referred to as the fire fogs that are seen in the area of Benton. Bear in mind they'd already seen this oval shaped blue light above them, is that as they went into this, they felt nauseous. The next thing they knew, they were 3/4 of a mile further on, about a kilometre further on. And that John Day looked at his wife is there, looks back to the kids, so everybody okay? And the two children that had been asleep as they'd gone into the mist were still asleep in exactly the same places. The third child, the oldest son, still had his hands on the passenger and the driver's seat in exactly the same way as he'd been when they went into it. And unless the aliens were particularly, helpful in rearranging everybody and trying to get the children to go back to sleep and everything, then to me, what happened is that they lost that 3 hours instantaneously. In other words, they entered into a multi-dimensional environment, something that we refer to as a bubble universe, that meant that they were outside of normal space-time during what we would call 3 hours, but then they were regurgitated out of it on the road. And when they came to, I mean, we don't know exactly what spot that they were placed back down. They could just simply have not remembered coming out of it the other side. But once they came to, they were about 3/4 of a mile further on, and they'd lost that time and that distance. In a way, it could well be that the vehicle was carried that distance as well. So in other words, they entered into a multi-dimensional environment and lost that time instantaneously. So where they spent that time, in other words, what happened to them during that 3 hours, is an experience outside of normal space-time. So timing in it has no relevance. It doesn't matter what they recalled. It's simply a human recall of things that were going on in their heads, a shared experience for the most part, but it doesn't really relate to our 3D reality. And I think that if you look at quite a lot of abduction cases, that the so-called on-board experience often does not relate time-wise to the known period that a person or a car or family are actually away from this physical reality. And what often happens is that somebody will disappear at one spot. There'll be searches for them. I mean, Travis Walton, for instance, back in 1974, that was the right year, back in certainly mid-70s. And people will search on the spot, search in the area, and where they reappear, searches will have gone on and nothing was there. And yet suddenly they're there. It's almost like they're taken away and then put back in the same spot, or, close to the same spot. So that they're outside of normal reality when these experiences take place. Now, I'm not saying that this can explain every abduction. Of course it can't.
No.
I mean, You know, I mean, a lot of that is, again, some kind of entanglement experience between us and probably these intelligences. Often, as we know, they take place at night, which is ideally when altered states of consciousness will occur. You know, and I mean, I'm not doubting that people disappear from their beds during those abductions. So we haven't got all the answers, but certainly what I'm saying can explain some abduction experiences and missing time episodes.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Question from Joey Hayes. Does Andrew have any opinions on the increase in the black triangle reports and videos of late?
Well, firstly, I mean, the black triangles do appear to be physical craft. And we're not just talking about three lights that just happen to be in a triangular configuration. So the first thing we have to say is there any chance that when they first started appearing, which I think was in the 1980s, this was not some kind of secret test aircraft that was created by one of the superpowers, you know, America, Russia, or something like that. I think it's unlikely, I'll be honest. So it therefore becomes a structured craft of unknown origin. However, the fact that we have got into our heads the idea that UFOs should appear like that has probably proliferated their appearance thereafter. In other words, the phenomena will often, you know, create itself,
Mimic.
itself to mimic what we expect to see. In the same way, going back to the 1950s and 60s, that very often we would see proper flying saucers.
Spot on.
Remember, all of that came from a misunderstanding of what Kenneth Arnold, the very first, you know, reported witness of UFOs in the modern era in 1947 said. I mean, he saw these 9 glowing objects over the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, and he said that they looked like their movement was they were skipping like a saucer over water, and that was misheard, and it became that they were flying saucers. So people in their heads start envisaging these flying saucers, 2 saucers on top of each other, and that becomes the archetype, the stereotype model of what a interplanetary craft should look like.
Yeah.
And I think the phenomena takes advantage of that. You know, it says, if you want to see flying saucers, I'll give you flying saucers. You know?
I'm on the same page there, Andrew, completely.
Okay,
Notice we don't see those same, you know, flying saucers that with gears and, you know, all the rest of it, and dials, all the rest of it. We don't see them today because our own technological advances have not only moved forward so much, but our perception of future technologies has changed dramatically. I mean, you think, for instance, of Star Trek. You know, the original series of Star Trek. You know, you look inside the you know, the control, whatever it is, panel, cabin, of all the dials and things to pull and press and buttons and stuff like this, communicators. We know that that's not our future. You know, we've moved on so much from that. But that in itself, that imaginary idea of what advanced technology will look like, probably helped define how we perceived the interior of UFOs and flying saucers in the past.
Yeah, brilliant, guys. Yeah.
I mean, at some point, we've got to understand that we don't need to see flying saucers. We don't need to see dashboards. We don't need to see these things are, I mean, pure energy, certainly as far as their original manifestation. And they can appear virtually as what they want. If you want alien greys, you've got alien greys. If you want archangels, you've got archangels.
Agreed.
If you want fairies, you know, folklore, that's what you'll see. But if you think that what's going on is demonic and that they're demons that are about to drag you to hell, that's what you will see. So choose wisely how you interpret this phenomenon.
That's a brilliant answer.
It is.
Andrew. Yeah, I've got a couple more messages here, and message from Valerie. That's your second question, this one, Valerie. Is Bempton on a ley line?
Well, Andrew,
Paul, go on.
well, I've only looked at maps with ley lines on, and they intersect, and it shows Flamborough Head. But if you look, I'd have been happy for Andrew to answer it simply because I can hear this echo. But if you look at where the line intersects, it's not actually at Flamborough Head. It is at Bempton. It's just that Flamborough Head is the prominent place that everyone is familiar with in the UK on the east coast. It is Bempton, and I've not moved it there for it to be Bempton. It is there. So there's two that cross at Bempton and then go out to sea.
Right. Okay. Well, look, I have a problem with ley lines, I'm afraid. I mean, in the 1920s, this antiquarian by the name of Alfred Watkins started to realize that many of our ancient monuments in the landscape were in lines. So he wrote a book called The Old Straight Track. It was, you know, I think probably a bestseller in its time, and it became very popular in the 1960s. And people would deliberately then go out and find so-called ley lines, because he called them lays. You know, lays was a word that he often found connected with these alignments of sites. So he thought that maybe that was the ancient name for them. But the problem is that the idea of the traditional lay of a series of monuments from the same period, remember, or maybe a site that had got a church built on it that was previously a pagan shrine or stone circle or something like this, that it started to diverge into what we call energy lines. And energy lines have today are considered to be the same as ley lines. And essentially what this is detectable energies that are found by dowsers using you know, angled rods and stuff like this. And these are considered to be ley lines. But in addition to that, obviously, where these ley lines cross are considered to be places of power. Now, I'm not denying that these places could be places of power, but but unfortunately, firstly, ley lines are a very subjective phenomenon now, I'm afraid. And in many ways, they're now superseded by the fact that we realise that what's of greater importance in the landscape is the geology of the landscape, particularly fault lines, minerals, metals like copper and iron, you know, minerals such obviously quartz, but there are other, you know, really important minerals like tourmaline. Tourmaline is a really, really important one that can produce piezoelectric activity. So this is what you should be looking for now. And for instance, in the area of Bempton, is that all of the prehistoric settlements in that area were built on fault lines. Every single one. Every single main
On what, Andrew?
settlement were built on fault lines.
Yeah.
You know, and particularly those that were built by the Grooveware culture from about 3000 to 2500 BC. And they were in the Bridlington area. They came originally from the Orkney Islands. They were the same people that created, you know, the main phases of Stonehenge, Darrington Walls, Avebury, Newgrange in Ireland. Where else? Places in Scotland around Carn Papel near Edinburgh, and various other places. And all of these locations, in Wales, of course, you know, the megalithic sites there. I can't remember the main, Bryn Silly Dhu, which is one of the main, you know, stone chambers there with standing stones. All of these locations, without exception, are known for mysterious light phenomena. Every single one, going back to the Orkney Islands, the areas where the settlements of the Grooveware culture there, as early as 3000, 3100 BC, are associated with mysterious lights. And the main area of interest looks out over these hills where lights are seen. which bears out this idea, which I've said, that they will locate their settlements and their monuments, their ritual landscapes, to look out over places where the lights will appear.
Okay. Les?
Yeah, well, that's a great answer, Andrew.
All right, I've probably got a couple more before my throat goes, and I think I've
yeah,
go off to
we're running late now, and I want to just ask Andrew where we can get his books.
Yeah, we'll ask Andrew where we can find your books, Andrew.
All right. And find out about Andrew Collins.
Well, look, I mean, there is loads of books. Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, Light Quest, which, I mean, if you want a primer for everything I've talked about today, buy my book Light Quest. Came out in 2012. It needs seriously updating, obviously, and quite a lot of what I'm saying there will go in the new book Origins of the Gods. But there's Denisovan Origins, the Cygnus Key, which came out in 2018. I mean, just go on to andrewcollins.com, click through. There's a section that says books, I think, and it'll just tell you everything I've ever done, and probably give you links where you can find them now. So that's the best thing. The other thing I must just throw out is that I know this is not a time to be thinking about tours necessarily, but in 2022 we got tours to Egypt in February 2022, and to Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, in May 2022. All the details of that are clickable through from my site andrewcollins.com. So if you're interested in those, just take a look.
Well, guys, we've had an absolutely brilliant show, and I'm sorry for the sound, and it's not Andrew or Les. God knows what's happened tonight. But I just think that's also the mark of a really genuine person. We've gone 2 hours. Andrew hasn't tried to push any of his work. I've had to prompt him to push it. He's there to hit us with the truth as Andrew Collins sees it. Thank you, Andrew.
That's my pleasure.
Okay.
Thanks,
yeah, well,
thanks everybody that's been viewing or listening. Thanks, Les, and thank you, Paul.
yeah, okay. Well, I've got to thank you guys, and we'll hopefully invite you on again. Would you take up the offer if we could improve the quality of the sound, Andrew?
Yeah, but I'm definitely going to say next time that there will be a certain amount of promotion involved, because it's when the new book Origins of the Gods coming out. Because
It's got to be.
I'd like to think that people could go away and actually just buy that if they want to take all this matter further. So
Just
That's
before
good.
we end this,
I'll be coming
though,
back for that.
excellent, please do. But just before we end this, Andrew did touch on Light Quest, one of his books. It's an absolutely brilliant book. I've read it. I wouldn't even say that if I hadn't. So if you are remotely interested in buying anything, check that book out.
Cheers. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Right, well, thank you again, guys. And it's been a great show tonight. And thanks for all the super chat. I did notice that on the chat room there. I've got to thank everybody for that. So, next... Yeah, your mic's not on, Paul. Yes, I'm just wrapping up. It's okay. Well, I've got to say thank you very much, everybody, for coming on to tonight's chat, tonight's show. Technical issues abound, as you can probably hear. But next week, we'll see you then. And we've got to thank... Oh, but before I go, I've got to thank our new moderator, Deborah Singleton, who did a great job tonight. And Andrew came on as well, our original moderator. So thanks for you two guys for your involvement tonight. So it's me signing off, and we'll catch you next time.